This week, guest expert Ari Guimon and I share development basics and web design 101. And Ari will give us a CSS overview and show us how to install a WordPress theme. Stick around, it's going to be a good one. Welcome to episode numero 11. I am your host, Jose Caballero, co-founder and chief creative officer of digital agency The Group. Every week you ask business, creative, tech, and marketing questions, and myself and our guest experts answer your design questions. Before we get started, I want to remind you guys there are 5 ways to reach us. You can ask live during the broadcast at Ustream at ustream.tv/thisweekin. You can ask us live also via YouTube at youtube.com/thisweekin. You can also ask us questions via Twitter by using the hashtag TWIWebDesign. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, and please, I am asking you to rate the show. If you like it, even if you don't like it, what can we improve? Go to iTunes, subscribe, and rate the show. And finally, my personal Twitter is Jose Caballero, at Jose Caballero. And in about a day or two, we're going to actually have a link so that you can go to Facebook and like us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ari, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
It's great to have you here. This is the fourth
installment of
our Web Design 101 series.
Right.
The 4th installment of Web Design 101. We hope you've been enjoying it. I want to introduce Ari. Ari is a freelance creative director who you've worked on everything from, recently MySpace, Savings.com, which you directed.
Right. Big name brands to tiny startups. I mean, we can name so many.
We can name so many, but you've been doing it for a while. And you're a combination, like I have in my notes always, of technical and design. So I'm really excited and happy to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, so today we have a lot to cover. We're getting into the technical stuff.
Right.
And to remind folks that the Web Design 101 series we started with information architecture basics. We did visual design basics, graphics production basics. And today we're going to do the basics of development.
Right.
So HTML basics in terms of the structure, CSS, which is something that has been amazing over the last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And we're going to do an install of WordPress if time allows for our audience. So that's a lot to cover. And before we cover all of this, I want to talk about Hover. That actually rhymes. Before we cover, I want to talk about Hover. And I'm really going to ask you guys again to please take a minute to go to hover.com and check them out. Also go to hover.com/TWID. Hover is a domain registrar where you can maintain and register your domains. And I hear some sirens there in the background. Can you hear them? Excellent. Yeah. Fires in Santa Monica. The key is that they're our sponsor, and I want to make sure that you guys, if you're registering or buying a domain, you actually use hover.com. I've been using hover.com to register my new domains. If you use the promo code WEEK, you're going to get a few things. One, they're going to waive the $25 transfer fee, and you can call them and have them do it over the phone at 866-731-6556. And the more important thing is that you're also that domain that you just transferred for $10 with 10% off, which makes it was 10% of 10. So it's 9.
Right.
For $9, you'll be able to have that domain register for an additional year. Please visit them. Please let them know that you watched the show and that you would like to try them out. So thank you so much for doing that.
And those prices are pretty reasonable compared to some of the other kind of hosting services.
Well, $9 with the 10% with the week.
15 or 20.
13, yeah. It is actually, and it's clean. The interface, I would pay extra just to have such a clean interface.
Right.
There should be a tax. Crappy interfaces you got to charge. You get taxed for that. So let's go right into it, and if we can put up the title card for Web Design 101 Development Basics. You started out with both technology and creative as an expertise in your field. And there's software. You have to choose software for design, like Adobe and Photoshop, Illustrator, Fireworks now after they acquired Micromedia. The same is true for code. And I don't want to go way back to the Neolithic, olden days of the 90s, etc. I just really want to focus on what designers, if you're a designer and a freelancer who has to do code, if you're a hybrid designer coder,
right.
or if you're a coder, and a lot of our clients in our client teams, we happen to have developers who are both back end and front end, or they're webmasters at these companies or at these organizations,
Right.
especially nonprofits, who design a bit to get their stuff done, but who collaborate with us.
Exactly.
So they're very technically oriented. That's who we're talking to. If that's who we're talking to, let's say a freelancer. What software would you recommend that, what can you use to write HTML code? Some of the basics.
I would say, like, obviously Dreamweaver is pretty industry standard. In some cases, I feel Dreamweaver is a little bit too robust for like just really simple HTML. There are editors out there. There's one called BBEdit. There's some called, and I actually Googled it, and it's on my screen. I Googled basic HTML editors, and here are the top 5. And these look pretty basic to me as far as what they can do. Qt HTML I've used before. It's just really, really simple. Cool Page, Hot Dog, PageWiz. Coffee Cup I've used as well. It's a free HTML editor. You can download it, and it's got great references or site builder. But hey, you can do this in TextEdit. You can do it in WordPad.
You can do it in WordPad. I like BBEdit a lot. Yeah. It has really great search and replace.
Right.
It has a lot of great, and again, so that people know I'm a graphic designer. I have taken HTML classes. I do know how, for the most part, but I do not do it at my company. We have people that do that for us. You're not doing that much anymore.
Right.
Even though you're a wizard.
Right, like we can do it, but you don't necessarily want to be doing it on the day-to-day.
And it's okay if you're doing both. There's designers out there who are building, designing, and it's funny because the definition of web design, when I look at my Twitter feed here for web design, it comes up technical design, and it's this weird kind of mesh.
It's a weird combination. That's interesting that you should say that. We were talking the other day about what a hot Web 2.0 company means. And that's kind of what we kind of concluded. It's like these people that have a really good grasp on current technological trends and can merge that really well with really great visual design.
Exactly. So let's get back to the nitty and the gritty. Let's talk about the structure of HTML.
Right.
So, and I'll go a little bit back just for this. In the 90s, as HTML became, you have this transition from text-based primarily in the internet when you were looking at bulletin boards, or if you had a Commodore 64, as a kid, you had access to bulletin boards, etc. They were all text-based.
Right.
There wasn't a graphical user interface. So Netscape, the first browser, allowed for a graphical interface, very rudimentary, gray background, graphics inline. It had the ability for graphics, which is great. But everything was structured using tables, which was kind of, here's a...
And you had to slice your graphics and put,
put them into the tables.
Yeah.
Awesome, I love that. There are a lot of cool artwork made out of tables.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you had to give all of the attributes specifically to each of the items.
Right, directly in the HTML.
So we have a header, how big the header is, etc. One quick story to talk about a little bit of, if you're... The question of, if I'm a designer, do I need to code? I get asked this all the time when I'm talking to graphic designers, either in school or interviewing them, or, oh, I don't want to do web because I don't know how to code. That pisses me off beyond belief, because you don't have to know how to code to be a web designer. 15 years doing web design.
Right.
I've only coded my own stuff.
It's actually better if you're not really like hands-on coding all the time, because it gives you more time to specialize in the visual part of it and just refining the interface, as opposed to, and this is something we run across all the time where, for example, and it happens to me a lot, when I have to code something that I'm designing, sometimes I limit myself in the design process because I'm thinking, oh, I can't make it that fancy because then I can't build it, And I think the good thing about removing the two is, the designer can just go buck wild, and then you just put it in front of the developer, and the developer, you can collaborate there, and just the developer might tell you, scale some things back. But it's always better to be told to scale back than to look at something and say, I could have pushed this further if I had more time to dedicate specifically to the UI.
So if this was the McLaughlin Group, which I don't even know if it airs anymore since I don't have a TV, it's like code versus design, fight!
Fight!
Actually, no, that's not the McLaughlin Group. That is Mortal Kombat.
Yes.
So the question really basically, the question, at least I'm not saying actually, is code versus design, which one do you specialize in? Our opinion, my opinion, is that you should specialize.
In what you love.
And that you can do both, and it's okay. You go both ways, that's fine. Just that's what you're going to end up focused on.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there that do that and that are our audience, so that's a great thing. So going back to the structure, can you show us a bit of the basic structures and talk about, how an HTML document, how to read it, how to look at it.
Absolutely. And if we can pull up my screen, I'm looking at our group site that we have. I have a really handy tool, and I want to recommend this to anybody who might be doing a little bit of HTML. And a lot of folks out there probably already know it. It's an extension called Firebug for the Firefox browser. And it basically, so I've got this little icon down here with the bug. I click on it on any page, and it's basically going to give me the structure of the page, the HTML on the left, and on the right, as I select different bits of HTML, it's going to tell me what CSS is in there. So just to take a step back and talk directly about HTML, HTML is composed of tags. So basically, you have an HTML tag or a head tag, and the tags, you can recognize them because they're encapsulated within the two brackets. So for example, the HTML tag kind of wraps around everything. And then inside of that, there's two main ones. There's the head and there's the body. The head is where you put, for example, the title of the page that appears on the title bar on your browser. And there's other code that you can put in there. You can put JavaScript. But actually, the stuff that's going to be rendered visually on your page is all in the body.
I want to tell a really brief story. And while I'm doing that, if you go to System Preferences, Universal Access, you can do the zoom and actually so you can see the thing. So I'm going to tell this story to the audience. I remember when I was, this is probably 15 years ago. I was at Art Center at the time, and I went to the Dominican Republic to visit my family and my cousin. I saw him doing some rudimentary web stuff with Flash, or actually just HTML. And I showed him WebMonkey, which is a great resource and something that I've used through the years. Google is the best resource today. Just Google any type of tag. And I actually shared also with him my books, all the books that I had on design and on. I sent him a box. It cost me like $150. And now it's 15 years later. He is a web developer. He's a back end guy. He became a programmer versus a designer, which is great. My brother is a developer, and he does both. He does code and he designs. And he's very good at both, actually. And he has his own startup. Pretty brilliant. It's at negocialo.com. It's a gift if you can do both. So going back to the structure.
And I've actually got the zoom in functionality, so here we go.
Great, so let's see your screen again.
So here's that structure that I'm starting to unfurl. And you can see, it's got the HTML, it's got the head and body. And once I open the body, you can start to see other divs, which basically a div is a container. It's just a box inside of which you put content. I got to zoom
like divider, it's like
they're dividers, exactly. So inside of and the great thing about Firebug is that once I mouse over the particular container, it highlights it in the viewport where I'm, there you go.
And you can save it, right?
And you can't save the edits that you're making, but you can do them real time. So a site that might be live, you can actually change it, and it changes right before your eyes, and then you can kind of be like, oh, I made this change here. You can try
things out,
right, you can try things out, and then you can kind of see where you made the changes. You go back to your code, and then
you do the change there.
Exactly.
So you're testing stuff out.
Exactly, pretty much. Yeah.
Very cool. And again, to give it, if I had never done any code in the world, programming is, oh my God, that's so. All HTML is really, it's just telling the browser where to put graphics.
That's actually an excellent point, and
stuff.
I think
it's not doing any. An application, like let's say PHP, let's say
that's
Perl, that actually makes things do stuff.
Right, because
like
it's
take this data and put it over here in the database and do this to it and bring it back out and bam, and you have something that it's doing.
That's actually a really
There's
good
a big
point.
difference. You can be a great front end developer and not have to figure out, and if this equals that, and then go do that and be a programmer.
That's actually a really good point, and I think if you asked like seasoned developers, they don't consider HTML programming. It's markup.
It's markup, yeah.
Markup. There's no logic
the snooty developers. We know who you are. We know you. We know you well.
We know who you are, yeah.
And again, talking specifically to designers who are considering becoming web designers, if you're a student, if you like the web and you're like, oh my God, I can't program, stop. You don't have to know how to program. You don't, I don't do programming. All right, so moving on to keep on track on the time. Okay, so we have this basics.
Right.
So one of the problems we talked about was that there's a lot of stuff. Code can get pretty messy. You have markup code where you're trying to put things and lay things out. And what happened recently in the last 5 years? The W3C or the standards in CSS developed.
Yeah, like
cascading
CSS
style
came out.
sheets.
Yeah.
CSS stands for cascading style sheet. So if we can bring the title card that says, basics of CSS,
It's
nice.
just basics, there we
Not
go.
to be confused with the band CSS. Talk to me, what is CSS?
So basically, CSS is a way that has been developed that you can remove appearance from structure. I think that's the basis of it. So
that sounds fancy.
you have the structure, which is the HTML. You say, on the top of my page, I'm going to have this. On the bottom of the page, I'm going to have this and this separately. You have a document that says, this top of the page has some text. It's going to be black. It's going to be red, etc. Move it up a little bit. Put some padding on it. Put some margin.
So it's kind of like when you're doing in InDesign, you have style sheets, or
It's like masters.
Masters in
Right.
Keynote or in PowerPoint. Okay,
Right.
so it's a way to apply globally a bunch of attributes to fonts and
Right.
to anything almost,
Right.
spacing even.
And I think that's
without,
the key. I think that's the
without
key,
having
like,
to rewrite it over and over again.
exactly. And I
Okay,
think that's the
got
key,
it.
like not actually having, like back in the day, you would have to go into the HTML and go like chunk by chunk and tell it, you look like this, you look like that. Now it's completely separate. You can have your HTML, you don't even have to touch it.
So you have to know CSS, and I know recently you a couple years ago or a year ago you showed one of the group's partners a little bit. You were showing them about. Can you share with us and the basics of CSS and do a document for us?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I can continue working on the off of the group site that I have right here. As I was saying earlier, as you select different tags on the left-hand side, you'll notice that the
On your
right-hand
screen.
side, on my screen, you'll notice that the right-hand side gets updated. And all that stuff that's in there, it's basically telling you, let me just select any one of these containers. Like, I'm going to select this one.
There you go.
It's going to tell me, it's got a height 30. And the good thing about CSS is that it's in plain English. So it's telling you, like, let me just zoom into that. It's basically telling you, the height is this. It's the text is set to align vertically to the top. List style type, these are attributes for lists. So bullet points, this is basically telling it, like, don't have any bullet points and don't have any indentation, for example, on the list item. And a couple other attributes here. Let me see if I can find some quick. Here's a quick one that we can look at. This is actually the font that's being used for that particular section. So you'll see it has the color, it's got the font family, font size, and again, it's all in plain English.
And Georgia, Helvetica, Arial, what that means at a real basic level, if it defaults to each. So if the computer doesn't have Georgia, it goes to Helvetica.
They're called
and then
font
goes to Arial.
stacks, yeah, exactly.
Font
If you
stacks.
don't have like Georgia, then it'll default to Helvetica. So the great thing about Firebug, and I'm going to try something out here, you'll notice that case studies and client list up there are in Georgia, but I can easily say like Arial Black, for example, and it'll, oops, I think I
So
spelled it wrong.
Firebug is a really great tool for people who are learning. Oh, there you go.
Look at
Changed
that.
it.
It changes it right away. And the good thing about it is that you can make these changes real time. Like something that used to be challenging before I started to use this tool is like trial and error. Like how much padding should I have? And then you make the change
Save
and upload the
it,
file.
upload it.
Oh, it's not there yet. With this thing, you're just like one by one, one pixel by one pixel until you know exactly how much you need, and then you go back to your
And
document
then you do it.
add that.
I mean, and
specific
Dreamweaver
number.
has great features for previewing. I mean,
Totally.
you can save preview very quickly locally on your hard drive, and it's not such a big deal. But I think one of the things that's interesting is that you have the site live, and you can actually go
In
in
the
and
browser.
look at
Totally.
what it might look like and change it.
Totally.
So CSS Basics, it's an interesting construct, and I still want to simplify it more. My suspicion is that our audience, if you're a freelancer and you do code and you do HTML and you do design, this is very this is simple, and this is too basic.
This is pretty basic
This is
stuff,
too basic.
yeah.
If you are a designer who hasn't done code, this is like, whoa, what is this?
Right.
One of the things that I learned personally is that it's more important to understand the language
Right.
than to know exactly how to do it.
Exactly.
Because once you understand the language, we can dialogue.
And we can avoid pitfalls too.
Not be afraid.
Right.
Avoid pitfalls. Not have this kind of what I call the Babel effect, which is that you're saying not Babel as in babbling, Babel as in the Tower of Babel.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the key terms that a designer should know with HTML
With HTML, I would say
and
know
CSS
what,
specifically?
yeah, I mean tags, like knowing what tags are and how they're structured. So you have the HTML tag on the outside, then you have the head and body, you have stuff inside the body. That's one thing. Knowing classes and IDs, which are the two
What are
types
those?
of. So for example, any given tag, you can assign either a class or an ID to it. The big difference there is an ID can be used once, and a class can be used multiple times. So what do I mean by that?
I didn't know that.
If you have an ID, you can apply it to, for example, a container that's a header container. You can say ID header, ID body, ID footer, for example. If you have a certain type of font size or something like that, you would use a class for that. So if you have like a header that's something that's being repeated on the page multiple times, you can say main header, for example, and then you can apply that class to multiple headers on your page. The big difference is IDs are used once and classes are used multiple times. Those are the two things that you can apply to HTML tags to then apply CSS to it.
Can you show the IDs versus classes
Absolutely.
right there?
And here we've got it. You know, if you look at it, let me zoom in for a minute so we can take a really good look at this. So for example, ID main container. That ID is only being used once on the page because it's for the main box that surrounds everything. The main nav 1, for example. Let me zoom out and look for something that might have a class instead of a, just look here real quick. Anything in the body will probably have it.
And something that for us, for creatives specifically, or people who don't necessarily do code, when you make a request and then you hear back from the developer, from the front-end developer, specifically when it comes to look and feel, you know, it can't do that, it can't look like that. For the most part, my philosophy is you can do anything.
Right.
And usually when somebody says they can't do it, is that they don't know how.
They don't want to do it,
or that they
don't
don't
know how.
they don't want to do it.
Right.
And you knowing the language helps you say, you
Helps
know
you
what,
a
I'm
lot.
pretty sure, I know that you can do it. So one of the things that I did, and both with my team at Racerfish when I was creative director of the LA office, and even more recently, is go to HTML classes every time that there's a major upgrade or a major change in the standards.
That's actually a really good point. And one of the tabs I have on my screen is the W3C
Let's show the audience that.
This is actually like the most basic, like the main place to go for like really basic information and a good introduction as to what CSS and HTML. They have HTML5 tutorials on here, and it basically will just break everything down. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. There it is. CSS styles define how to display HTML elements. It's like all the basics right here, and then it starts to break it down for you, like why it's used, what's good about it, and then it gives you specific examples. The good thing, the main thing, here's a section talking about ID selectors versus class selectors. So this is something that applies to what we were just talking about. The ID selector is used to specify a style for a single unique element.
Can you tell us the URL again? What the URL is?
This is w3schools.com /CSS. Let me just zoom into it so you can take a look at it. But if you just Google like CSS tutorials, this is probably the link that's going to come up at the top.
Yeah. And it's an important one. Somebody's asking on Twitter, I think the hardest thing to understand into CSS are the float and position absolute relative for a guy new to code.
We could talk about that. That's a little bit more
Talk about
advanced.
that a little bit. It's from Cosmin Madeline, one of our viewers.
So the float and what was it that she said?
He.
Oh,
it's a he.
Sorry.
I think that the hardest thing to understand in CSS are the float and position.
And positioning elements. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, basically, when you have any type of container or element and you assign it a float, it's basically going to push it to one of either side. Like you can assign float left, and it'll push things to the left of the row in which it's in. If you have a consecutive list of items and you apply float left to all of them, they're all going to stack next to each other. So that's a great way to do, for example, navigations. Right.
So you're expecting it to be below and then
Right.
go to the left, and you have to put a break in between it.
Exactly.
But what it's doing, and you don't want to use breaks to do formatting. You're
Right.
using CSS primarily.
Right.
It's putting them all next to each other, so that could get confusing.
Exactly. That's actually a really good point. Like something also that's important to understand at a really basic level is that HTML is composed of inline and block level elements. Block level elements will always render in a new line. Inline elements will always render next to each other. So if you have some text and you add a link is an inline element. It'll be right next to it. It'll be in line with the rest of the text that you're writing. So that's a really good point. The block level elements, when you assign floats to them, a float left to a bunch of block level elements, they'll all stack next to each other really nicely. So to do a nav or something.
And the absolute versus relative?
Absolute versus relative. When you do, at a really basic level, absolute means the absolute area of the page. So for example, if I assign something, I'm telling something, you have a position absolute 0, 0. That means like top 0, left 0. it's going to put it at the very top left of my page. Relative means relative to the position where it is currently, right? So that's the big difference there. When you say position absolute and you have an element here, it's going to push it globally with respect to the whole page. When you say relative, it's like relative to the position it's in. So for example, relative is a great way if you, for example, you have an icon, you assign an icon and you have a link next to it, and the icon's slightly skewed, you can apply like position relative to this guy and just tell him, you know, just move it a little bit, like a couple pixels relative to the position where it's in currently.
Got it.
Not absolutely.
It's not absolute to the positioning of the frame.
Of the whole
it's
page.
relative to where it's located.
Exactly,
So, Cosmin, I hope that answers your question a little bit. And if you have any bigger questions, you know, send us a file, and Ari and I will take a look at it. So we're running a little bit out of time, and I want to get a bit to the WordPress. The third module, the WordPress install that we have, installing WordPress. So installing WordPress, and we covered Squarespace, which is a great platform,
Yes.
and also one of our sponsors that we love dearly. But we also wanted to share some of the other options for platforms and content management. And over the last 5-6 years, WordPress has become pretty huge,
Pretty robust.
and pretty robust in what it can do. And there are sites. It's funny because even the group website is not on WordPress. Our blog is on WordPress.
Our blog is on WordPress.
And somebody noted,
right.
you have a WordPress template as your site. And no,
No,
but
it's really not that.
our blog only.
But that's actually a really good point. Like, there is that perception that WordPress is for blogs, but it's really not. The way it's evolved, like at this point, it's almost like a content management system in and of itself. So you can have the blog component, but you can have tons of other pages, and you just format them specifically to suit your needs.
And again, at a real simple level, content management system, or CMS, one of the things, if you're a designer and you're building a site and you know that in the past, and I think at this point most designers are pretty familiar with the options that they have from a content management. You don't want to have to be coding a page every time you have to do it. You want to have something where you write it and it's already
Right.
it's already formatted, and it just, you know, you add a post. Blogging, which technically was just content management with using XML and, you know, other things that made it what we call today. Oh, and opinions, you know, ranty, you know,
Right.
kind of post is what made it today. And then microblogging, which is even smaller, which is Twitter. The point being that if you take a step back, WordPress is a great content management system. We use WordPress. We just launched a few sites that are using WordPress as a content management system for medium, you know, and even, you know, small and medium, fairly large organizations for their main primary websites that don't
Right.
have a lot of functionality.
Right.
We also use Drupal quite frequently, and we're not going to go into Drupal versus WordPress. Let's talk about installing WordPress, and in the few minutes that we might have, or at least introduce a little bit of it, and if we run out of time, we can do a full install in the next segment.
Totally.
What are the basic things that somebody needs to do to install a WordPress theme?
Right. I think the main thing to know, and we were talking about this on our way over here.
So I was scared of it. So we know we have Tumblr.
Totally.
So I got a call from someone the other day. Hey, I'm a fashion designer, and she wanted to know, you know, she wanted to build a site, and I told her, just go to WordPress.com and build a site.
It's not scary.
You know, it's not that scary.
Right.
And she's like, well, I'm not technically focused. The way that I've dealt with it over the last 15 years is just being kind of crazy, not caring. Even if I don't know about it, I just try it out.
Right.
And it might break and it might mess it up.
That's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing as long as you're not spending or wasting
Right.
a lot of money. Yes, time for sure.
Right.
And it's not
actually,
that difficult.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, I think something we were talking about is the two kind of modalities that WordPress has. And I think something, for somebody who's maybe a little bit more afraid of the technical, they might want to choose to do a WordPress.com install, which basically removes a lot of the complexities from a technical standpoint. You're basically having your website hosted on the WordPress servers, and then you have a little bit less of like the technical stuff to do.
You don't have to deal with hosting. You don't have to deal with server configuration.
Exactly.
You don't have to deal with, oh my God, what if I screwed up my
Right.
PHP permissions?
Where do I upload these
and
files?
where do I upload these files?
Right.
So for me, let's quell my anxieties about installing WordPress, because I've never done a WordPress install. I've always had someone do it for me.
Right.
And we have multiple installs both for clients, the group blog. There's multiple blogs that I've done, and the blog that we are using now as a test is actually Jose Caballero which
Yes.
is at some point I will have as a destination where I can actually rant, because I can't rant on the group blog. I can only do stuff that's company oriented. No, I'm not going to rant on josecaballero.com. I'm just going to share my experience. Share with us a little bit of the basics. What do I need to do to prepare?
So there's a couple things that you're going to need if you choose to go with a WordPress.org, which is the whole, you basically are going to install the package of files on your server. So you have to deal with hosting. I don't know if you want to talk
So
a little bit about that.
WordPress.org is open source, and that's where you go.
And that's where you go. You download a zip file with a bunch of, PHP and other files in it. You need to have hosting set up.
Okay, let's say I have hosting already.
Okay, you have hosting set up already. So basically, you need to do two things. You need to download the WordPress.com.
Can we see the WordPress.org website?
It's on
there we
my
go.
screen.
That's what it looks like. WordPress.org.
This is what it looks like, and then you've got like your big download WordPress 3.1 button here. So you go ahead and you download that. That's going to give you a zip file. And then there's something else you need to know. You need to have access to the control panel for your hosting service. So basically, what does that mean? That's where you go and you create, for example, email accounts, or where you go and you add additional like subdomains or something like that. You need to have access to this because...
And we happen to have Media Temple, and they use Plesk as a control panel.
Exactly.
Rackspace, a few other hosts use Plesk. It's pretty
yeah,
it's
Plesk
pretty
is pretty
standard.
common. I've seen some other ones, but Plesk is pretty common.
Plesk is just an interface to all the different controls that you have on your server. You can restart your server. You can keep in mind, a server is just a machine. It's a box that's remote somewhere. And in your case scenario, if you're doing shared hosting, it's actually a part of a box.
Right.
So it's even different. So you need to get, what do you need to do on the control panel?
So on the control panel, you basically, and I have it on my screen right now, you basically need to get to the page that has all the options for your domain. All you need to do, you need to create a new database, which you'll see I've already created one down here called Jose Caballero database.
So you just enter the name, or you click on add new database, and you put a name.
And then you
Got
say,
it.
like, for example, test database, you hit OK, and then there's one more thing you have to do. You have to create, each database has a user associated to it. So you can create multiple users with different privileges. You just create,
create one user.
Test user, and then you give it like a password and another password, and hit OK.
And that's the basic. And for those of you, again, a database in its shortest form is a bucket.
It's a bucket where you store information.
This is a bucket of coffee.
There you go.
Database is where I put, all the content that's going to go on the website.
Right. So basically, WordPress is giving you the framework that people are going to look at, where you're going to write stuff. But basically, WordPress needs a bucket to throw all the content into.
And the bucket is basically an Excel file. It's like an Excel, tables and rows.
It's tables and rows,
That's
exactly. And the good thing about it is you can export it later on if you want to have a backup of your data, if you want to migrate it somewhere else.
So we're out of time, and I want to tell viewers what's going to happen next week. So we got through the first part of the WordPress install, and the full WordPress install we're going to do in a few weeks when we pick up our Web Design 101 segment. Again, next week we're actually going to have a very cool guest we're going to start a small segment, or not a small segment, we're going to start a segment where we feature agencies and the creative work, and we're going to start here in Los Angeles. I really want you guys to be part of this, because how do you see what people actually do in the real world? And the agency that we're going to feature next week is Bad Assembly. You can check out their work at badassembly.com, and they are badass. They do a lot of cool work for advertising agencies. Ari just brought their site up. Can you show a little bit about Bad Assembly?
Yep. Here's what came up when I typed in Bad Assembly.
Yep, that's them.
Some of their work.
And they do a lot of cool, they do Flash work, which is going to be an interesting conversation to talk about Flash. It's very dynamic.
A lot of people have that question.
A lot of people have questions about Flash, so don't forget to tune in next week when we feature Bad Assembly, and we're going to go over their work. And we will pick up the WordPress install. But if you have any questions, don't forget that you can always tweet me at Jose Caballero, and we'll try to answer your questions. Remember, do not be afraid. Sounds like use the force. Do not be afraid. If you're a designer, go ahead and make the mistakes. Get a WordPress.com. I have a Tumblr blog that I've used. I have all these different things.
It's the only way you're going to learn.
It's the only way that you're going to learn. Go out there. Thank you so much, Ari, for the awesome tutorials. Really appreciate having you here helping me with this. And I look forward to continuing the Web Design 101 series. The next series is going to be Web Design 102, and we're going to go into intermediate information architecture, intermediate visual design, intermediate production, and intermediate development. And we'll probably try to do the WordPress install in the first segment so that everyone gets that. Again, tweet. Don't forget to go to Facebook and like us, that would be really appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe and rate us on iTunes. And we'll see you next week on This Week in Web Design.